but don't stand in the way of the camera, which is right there. And also, Benji is thankfully assisting me to record audio because I want to share this with all the people who couldn't be here, which is a number of people. But yes. So I always like to think I could go off the top of my head, but anytime I do, I end up completely way off what I was actually going to talk about, so I have a script. But yes, so I wanted to say good afternoon and thank you all for coming out, especially at such short notice for most of you, kind of being called to the last second. And I know I've talked to some of you already, and you know I'm being baptized today, but for most of you, you're probably wondering because either, one, you've known me to always be Christian, so it doesn't make sense that I'm like suddenly getting baptized. And then for some of the rest of you who know a little bit more of my journey over the last years, months, and even days, may be wondering what changed. Because while I was raised in a Christian home, and Jesus and Christianity was always my reality growing up, I started seriously doubting Christianity when I came to college. It's kind of been a progression of becoming more and more skeptical over the last few years, because growing up, a lot of really simple answers were given for really complicated life things that as a kid it was really easy to say, oh, like it's just that answer and like it's easy and move on with life. But then as I started to develop a more complicated understanding of the world, suddenly a lot of those things didn't make so much sense. And so I've been kind of going on this journey. So let's go back to my script. So it's like the problem of suffering doesn't seem so easily explainable anymore. And after studying psychology, I have a harder time understanding exactly the doctrine of sin a little bit. And sometimes I'm also wondering how it makes sense that someone like me got to be born into a context where Christianity is so easily accessible, and yet there are other people, like in the Middle East, where they're raised to despise Christianity. And even now at this moment, I really have no clue for a lot of those things outside of just the Bible says it's this way, but like with my mind and my logic, I have no comprehension of those things. It doesn't make sense to me. But so the thing that happened this last week is I kind of had a realization, and it's a little ironic, the context or the framework I developed to be able to figure this out. And so a fun fact about me is I really like tricking people. A lot of you may know that. I really like pranking people and tricking people and misleading them to be funny. I am honest to a fault at times, and yet I have no problem lying to the face of my roommate to involve him in some evil scheme.
Poor Benji.
So the flip side of that is, since I'm always tricking people, I sometimes live in kind of this paranoid state where I feel like other people are always trying to trick me. And it makes me a little skeptical of people sometimes. And so this thing happens when you're trying to trick someone, or maybe when you've tricked someone before and this time you're not, but they think you are. And the framework I've been using to describe this a little is like walking through a door. And so it's like if I got home and I go into the house and I'm walking toward my room and I see Benji standing in there, and he's standing in the door, like on the side of the door looking at me, I might get a little sketched out, and I'm like, what's Benji doing there? Like, is he, and he might be like, oh no, like nothing's up, like I was just standing here, just happened to be here when you got home, like just come in the room, like everything's gonna be okay. And I might be looking at him and I'm like, I feel like something might be up. And my normal tendency is, even if I might not have a really good reason to be sketched out or like suspicious, I might stand or like stay outside of the room for like a really obscene amount of time just to be extra sure that I'm not going to be tricked. And it's not because I couldn't handle being like spooked, like if somebody was just going to jump out. It's like, I could take that. But I don't like being tricked, which is the ironic part. It's like, I'm willing to trick other people. I don't like being tricked. And so if I even have like the slightest feeling that I might be tricked, I can't prove that I'm not going to be tricked. The only way to figure it out is to either go through it and get tricked or not tricked, or to just never go through the door. And so this framework, that feeling of like somebody being like, hey, come through the door, and that like puts you in a place and you have to make a decision. It's like, am I going to walk through that door even though I don't get it, even though I can't prove whether I'm going to get tricked or not, or am I going to stand out here and just say that I don't know? And for the last number of years I've gotten to a point where I want to say that I don't know, and I think it would be honest to say that I don't know. And so walking through that door is kind of scary because I have a fear of being tricked. And I think that maybe even came out of having all these simple answers growing up and realizing that it's not that simple made me feel tricked. Like I was lied to growing up, that these answers I was given weren't actually true. And so now it's like, was Christianity itself just a trick? Is it an illusion or is it real? So this weekend I kind of had a realization that to be a Christian, I can't logic it out all the way. It's like logic can get me to a point, but then after that I have to decide, in the midst of not getting it, in the midst of not understanding it, am I going to walk through that door and trust that God isn't going to trick me, but that he is who he says he is and that he's going to take care of me. And so this weekend, that's the decision I came to, that in the midst of having really big questions that to me don't have any answers that make sense, I want to commit my life to trusting God and trusting Christ. And so that's why you are all here today, to witness my baptism as I make this decision.
Love you, Nehemiah.
Yeah! And one last comment that I did want to make is that everyone who I invited here today, I invited specifically because I'm a hugely external processor, and it takes so much talking for me to figure things out inside of my mind. And everyone here has probably spent at least a little time listening to me talk, trying to figure things out. Many of you have said very insightful things to me and have encouraged me. And at the very least, and maybe the most important part, you guys have all been non-judgmental and supportive of me, calling to question something Christian communities aren't always okay questioning. And your guys' non-judgmental support has meant so much. And I couldn't be here without all of you guys standing by me, listening to me and supporting me. So I appreciate you all so much.
It's a privilege, as I've been able to meet with Nehemiah for a few semesters now, and see his journey and hopefully provide some insight. But it's unique and special for us and me as well to baptize him in these same waters where I was baptized as a believer 14 years ago. And so it's kind of come full circle, as I grew up in the church as well, learned all those same Sunday school answers, and then started to wrestle with those harder questions. And so it's special to share this moment again with you. I also got asked this morning to baptize him, and so I just wanted to kind of ask him some questions based on his proclamation of faith, and amongst this crowd of what do I call it, you guys? Witnesses, thank you. Words are hard. So I want to ask Nehemiah just a few questions before we get in the frigid waters here for him to answer. Do you acknowledge that you were a sinner deserving of eternal punishment, and that you can do nothing to earn God's favor by your own efforts? Do you acknowledge that Christ is God's one and only remedy for our sin and the only provision for our salvation? Do you acknowledge that by your identification with Christ by faith, you died to sin and were raised in the newness of life in Him? Is your intention to live a different life because of your trust in Jesus and the new life He has given for you? Amen. Based on these confessions of faith, it's an honor and an exciting time to baptize Nehemiah, so we're going to get wet. It's going to be awesome.
Careful with the snake in bracket. That was a snake.
love you.